Good day, everyone. Welcome to another lecture on our Science 10. And our topic for today is about the processes that occur along plate boundaries. This would include week 5 and week 6 of your Science 10 quarter 1. If you are new to this channel, please do not forget to click that subscribe button. Please also give it a thumbs up and share it to your classmates and friends. So, as a review, last lecture that I gave, we learned about the different types of plate boundaries, which are oceanic to oceanic. You have your continental to continental, continental to oceanic convergent boundaries, and we have divergent and transform plate boundaries. We also learned how to determine the locations of different types of plate boundaries across the different continents of the world. Now, the objective for this lesson is for you to explain the processes that occur along convergent, divergent, and transform fault boundaries. First, let us look at some of the important features of the Earth's surface. The Earth's surface is a giant jigsaw puzzle composed of 20 tectonic plates with enormous sections that roughly fit together and meet at places called plate boundaries. Plate boundaries are important since they are often associated with earthquakes and volcanoes. We know that earthquakes are actually enormous amount of energy released when plates grind past each other. For volcanoes, we also know that molten rock from deep within Earth can travel upward at these intersections between plates. Now, for your learning task 1, you're asked to read and study the different types of plate boundaries, and after which you're going to answer the questions that follow after the discussion of the contents on plate boundaries. If we're going to look at this image, we're going to first discuss the processes that take place in convergent plate boundaries. Look at the image and you can see that we have there a this one is a continental plate boundary and this one is an oceanic plate actually. When they collide, the thinner and denser oceanic plate is overridden by the thicker and less dense continental plate. The oceanic plate is forced down into the mantle in a process known as subduction. As the oceanic plate descends, it is forced into higher temperature environment at the depth of about 100 miles or 160 kilometers. Materials in the subducting plate begin to approach their melting temperature and a process of partial melting begins. As you can see, this part starts to melt and you can see here a magma chamber starting to form. Now, one result of that conversion, or rather converging plate boundary, one oceanic and one continental, is the Nazca plate. The oceanic Nazca plate and the continental South American plate resulted in the orogenic activity that produced the Andes Mountain. I'm sorry. This is the picture of the Andes Mountain. You can see here the beautiful picture of the Andes Mountain ranges. That is actually the result of the collision of the converging oceanic Nazca plate and the continental South American plate here. So they produce the Andes Mountain. The Andes Mountain ranges is the world's longest mountain range which cuts across 7 countries in South America. So could you imagine how long is that mountain range? This mountain range is actually not just an ordinary mountain range, they are volcanic in nature. While some are dormant volcanoes, others are active and have the potential to erupt at any moment. Again, as you can see in the image, they are not just a single chain of mountains. Instead, they are composed of number of parallel chains that connect from place to place in orographic rows from one another, creating high plateaus between them, as you can see in the image. Now, what happens if two oceanic plates collides? So one of the plates, as you can see in the picture, will subduct beneath the other, and we can say that the one that subducts is the one that is older and denser. So we have here two oceanic plates and they are moving toward each other. So basically this one, which is older and denser, would subduct beneath the other plate. The subducting plate is heated as it is forced deeper into the mantle, as you can see in this arrow. And at the depth of about 100 miles, the plate again begins to melt. The same thing with oceanic and continental converging plate boundaries. You can see here in the picture, magma chambers are produced as a result of this melting, and the magma is lower in density because it's hot than the surrounding rock material. It begins to ascend, or it goes up by melting and fracturing its way through the overlying rock material. Magma chamber that reached the surface, as you can see here, it would break through to form a volcanic eruption cone. Early stages of this type of boundary, at the early stage of this type of boundary, the cones will be just deep beneath the ocean surface. But later it would grow to be higher than the sea level. And this would eventually produce the island chain, as you can see here, or island arcs. Alright? So, with continued development, the islands grow larger, they would somehow merge, and an elongate landmass is created, as you can see here. Of course, there is formation of trench in that area in the subduction zone. So this would form the deep part of the ocean, the trench. And parallel to the trench, we have the island arcs forming on top of the ocean. So one classic example of this is the Aleutian Islands and the Aleutian Trench as product of two converging oceanic plates. As you can see in this aerial picture or aerial view, they are a chain of 14 large volcanic islands and 55 smaller islands formed in the early Eocene when the subduction of the Pacific plate under the North American plate began. Another example of this is our very own the Philippine archipelago. The Philippine archipelago is actually island arcs that produce also with the converging two oceanic plate boundaries. So the last kind of the convergent plate boundary, we have the convergence of two continental plates. So we have to take note the difference of the first two with this one. When there is conversion of two continental plates, a continental plate colliding, this happens when two continental plates are colliding against each other without any subduction. What we have here would just be collision zone. The collision zone is just a place where folded and truss-folded mountains form. Since there would be no subduction, there would just be collision zone. So what you can see here are folded and truss-folded mountains on top. Okay, so there would be no volcanoes, no trench, no volcanic island or island arc. There would just be mountain range, folded and truss-folded mountain range on this area of the collision of the convergent plates. So as you can see here, we have here examples of the folded and truss-folded mountains. So next, what about the divergent plate boundaries? What are the processes that take place in divergent plate boundaries? So we can see here in the picture that these two arrows are on the opposite, going on the opposite side, meaning they are moving away instead of moving toward each other, they are moving away from each other. Now, what would be the result of that phenomenon? So we have here, when a divergent boundary occurs beneath oceanic lithosphere, the rising convection current below lifts the lithosphere, producing a mid-ocean ridge. So instead of collision forces, we have your extensional forces that stretch the lithosphere and produce a deep fissure. So the key word here is fissure. When the fissure opens, pressure is reduced on the superheated mantle material below. It responds by melting, and the new magma flows into the fissure. The magma then solidifies, and the process repeats itself. So the product here are the geologic feature is the mid-ocean ridge. Of course, the process would be there would be extensional forces and drifting away of the oceanic lithosphere, because in this example, we have oceanic lithosphere or oceanic plates that are diverging from each other. So one classic example of a mid-ocean ridge is the famous Mid-Atlantic Ocean Ridge located in Iceland. So you can see here, it's very evident that these two plates, the North American plate and the Eurasian plate, are actually ripping this entire Iceland country. So that's forming the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So this is actually the actual picture of the people enjoying their snorkeling activity during summer, because during summer we have clear waters that are warm. So the combination of nice weather with snorkeling between the Eurasian and the American continent can become one of the best memories. So you can see here, this is the North, this could probably be the North American plate, and this one could be the Eurasian plate. So people here have very good memories of snorkeling in the middle of two plates that are diverging. So we say that these are actually oceanic plates. So what if we have two continental plates instead of two oceanic plates that are drifting? So in this image, we have two continental plates that are diverging. They are stretched, causing fractures to form at the plate boundary or the point of intersection, and the land in between the two continental plates sinks, forming a linear depression known as a rift valley. So in this case, it is showing here the East African Rift Valley. Okay, so what happens is that, of course, this East African Rift Valley is a narrow zone. So there is a rift, and it's developing, um, we call this actually from the diversion of Somali plate and the Nubian plate at a rate of 6 to 7 millimeter per year. So imagine that, okay? So this is actually the African plate is being split into two smaller plates, so forming the East African Rift Valley. So earlier on, when two oceanic plate boundaries are diverging, we form the mid-oceanic ridge. But when we have two continental plates that are diverging, we have the Rift Valley instead being formed. So remember the features of divergent boundaries. We have the mid-ocean ridge that are being formed when two oceanic plates are diverging. We have the rift valleys when two continental plates are diverging, thus forming fissure volcanoes, and of course, there would be a lot of earthquakes happening in that area. So, I guess before we move on to our last plate boundary, you can now answer the question to your learning task. So you should answer this question. Number one, what process occurs along divergent plate boundary? Number two, what geologic features form when two plates move away from each other? I already discussed that earlier. And then you have to compare Rift Valley from mid-ocean ridge. Explain your answer. Lastly, we're going to discuss what are the processes that take place in a transform plate boundary. We know that transform plate boundaries are locations where two plates slide past one another. There is a fracture zone that forms a transform fault plate boundary rather, and that would form the transform fault. Okay, so these two, as we know earlier, that they are sliding past each other. They are not converging, they're not diverging, but they are just grinding past each other. Most transform faults are found in the ocean basin and connect offsets in the mid-ocean ridges. A smaller number connect mid-ocean ridges and subduction zones. So what is actually happening in this would be a lot of earthquakes along faults. So there would be a lot of earthquakes along faults. So in our past lecture, we know that one example of transform plate boundary is the Andreas fault or the St. Andreas fault, wherein a lot of earthquakes are happening in that area, specifically in the Los Angeles, California area. So we have here, how do plate boundaries become transform fault? Okay, you have here in this image, transform fault can be distinguished from typical strike slip faults because the sense of movement is in the opposite direction. A strike slip fault is a simple offset. However, a transform fault is formed when two different plates, each moving away from the spreading center of a diverging plate boundary. When you look at the transform fault diagram, imagine the double line as a diverging plate boundary and visualize which way the diverging plates would be moving. Now you can answer these questions. What process occur along transform fault plate boundary? How do plate boundaries become transform fault? And why do transform fault occur in lithosphere? For your learning task 2, you should study the pictures and the group of words inside the box. Use the words to explain the processes that occur in each picture. Write your answer in your notebook or in your paper. So again, in this picture, we have here two oceanic plates that are converging. So in my discussion, you should be able to pick from these words to explain the processes that occur in this picture. Picture B. This is actually a picture of a transform uh, plate boundary. So you should be getting from these words to explain what are the processes that are taking place in this picture. Picture C is actually a picture of a divergent plate boundary formed by two continental plates that are moving away from each other. So these are continental plates that are moving from each other. So again, you should be able to pick from these words and explain the processes that occur in each picture. For learning task 3, you should be able to explain the processes along plate boundaries using this graphic organizer. If you can see, you have here at the middle written convergent plate boundaries. We have 3 convergent plate boundaries. You can write here 1, Oceanic-continental. You can write here 2, Oceanic or Oceanic-oceanic. And we have here 2, continental or continental to continental convergent plate boundary. So inside these circles, you should be writing at least 2 to 3 sentences explaining the processes that occur along these plate boundaries. For learning task number 4, you just need to read the questions below and pick the best letter for your answer in each item. Okay, and write the letter of the answer in your paper or your notebook. So you have here 15 questions that you should be able to answer for this learning task 3 and 4 of your weeks. The task would be learning task. Yes, you have learning task 2, 3, and 4. Learning tasks 1, 2, 3, and 4 rather for your weeks 5 and 6. So that will be all. Thank you very much for listening. Again, please do not forget to subscribe and share this video.